All right, well, Cait, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this. You are my sixth guest in a row in 6 days. So it's been a little good long stretch of this. So, but I'm still good to go. I got a lot more in me.
Good.
If you don't mind, for the folks that aren't familiar with you, can you give us a little background history? Tell us your story, if you don't mind.
Of course. First, thank you for having me, Shawn. Just need to make sure I say that first and foremost. But so I'm Cait Mizzi. I'm a Canadian, so north of the border. I'm a functional nutritionist with a now private clinical practice in the land of virtual reality, because the physical clinic shut down in COVID at the beginning, and I just rolled with it and have been enjoying working from home since then. So seeing all of my patients online in this space. And I came into this kind of work, especially an animal-centric approach to nutrition, based on my own health journey. I had 2 autoimmune conditions by the time I was 5 years old, and spent 25 years after that trying to understand how to either alleviate some of the symptoms or put them into remission, or even just understand how and why they even began. And that was, after spending close to a decade as a vegan, and finding my way back to the light, finding my way back to, deep nutrition through not a carnivore approach for me specifically, but a very animal-centric approach. And now I use that same logic with my clients and patients, and have really exceptional success, which is so important to see and makes it all very worthwhile.
I'll just ask a couple of interesting questions. So, at least I think they're kind of, observations. We see that among, I guess, folks that are dietitians, nutritionists, it tends to be a female-centric specialty. I mean, there's more females than there are male. We also see a high number of disordered eating among the actual people that practice this. And so we have a lot of people that go into it because they have a relationship with food. Maybe it's not healthy and they're trying to figure it out. So they seem to have a lot of folks that do that. A lot of them do opt in for a plant-based diet. And so there is some overlap between eating disorders and plant-based diets. Do you think there's anything to that? Is that something you've seen among your colleagues, I suppose? And if you could, I'm not sure, when you say functional nutritionist, is there an afunctional nutritionist? I mean, what does that actually mean?
I think, so 2 questions there. Let's talk about functional nutrition first, just to get that out of the way, and then we'll talk about the eating disorders. So functional nutrition, meaning that I am a licensed nutritionist, but that I have done extra education and certifications within functional medicine. I can't call myself a functional medicine doctor because I'm not a doctor. So I'm a functional nutritionist, meaning that I do a lot more testing. So I'm using a lot more, like GI mapping, fecal testing, hormone testing, and other things like that, other modalities like that. So we really get to understand what's going on, instead of all of the guesswork that sometimes comes along with, maybe a nutritional practitioner who's just able to sort of assume based on symptoms. Symptomology is, of course, still very, very important. And then I guess back to your eating disorder question. Yes, for sure. I see a lot of disordered eating, both within the professional space, so within nutritionists and even doctors and other clinicians and practitioners who deal in food. But then, of course, mostly, even more so with clients and patients. So disordered eating does seem to be quite commonplace these days, whether it's anorexia or bulimia or food addiction or just obsessive compulsive behaviors around food. And I think that it is so multifaceted, we would have to do an entire episode just on that one question. But for sure, within the vegan space, I see it absolutely more so than anywhere else. And I think it's just because it is a state of chronic deficiency, and that is a very, I think, natural place to then develop these negative behaviors and tendencies around food, whether it's obsessively eating because you're never satiated and you're not getting what you need, or you've adopted a vegan diet in the first place in order to potentially lose weight or look good without really considering the long-term effects.
Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I interviewed Dr. Stefan Van Vliet from Duke University, and he's doing a lot of research in what's called nutriomics or metabolomics. And what he told me, and it's not surprising to me, but it was just kind of interesting to see this in detail on what's known so far. So within beef, there are now identified something like 55,000 individually metabolically active compounds. It's not just amino acids and fats and a few vitamins. There's 55,000 different compounds. And we have this belief that, it's a few nutrients that's going to make a difference, when all of these likely have some sort of impact on our health. And so, when we're trying to figure out nutrition and you realize that, hey, one food has 50,000 compounds in it. How are we ever going to sort of figure this out and say, this is what you need? And we don't even know. We likely haven't even identified 1% of all food substances that are out there. And then when there are people saying, I'm just going to give this, and I can replace that with a few vitamins and I can make it taste the same, i.e. the faux meats or the plant-based meats. So does that fact sort of interest you at all?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I don't think that we know half of what we are capable of knowing. We certainly know more than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and beyond. And I think every day we're learning more and more. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I don't know a lot about that specific number and what all of those compounds are, but surely there are going to be some that are exceptionally important and critical for health. And then maybe there'll be others that we learn potentially have some sort of negative effect, the same way that we see in plants. I would doubt that we're going to find, plenty of negative compounds in meat, because it really truly is the most, the long-standing food in human history. So it sort of makes sense to me that it would be the safest as well. And it certainly seems that way in practice. Most specifically in my most sensitive patients, so people that are, deeply suffering from autoimmune disease and conditions like that, food allergies, terrible gut health, et cetera, they seem to all be fine on meat. So I have a feeling that will remain a safe food for many, many, many moons to come, I hope.
Yeah, provided it's still available. That's right. If you're willing to, let's talk a little bit. You said when you were 5 years old, you had a couple autoimmune issues and you've been dealing with that over a long time. Are you able to talk about those in any detail?
Of course, yeah. So basically, the way it went is I came down with scarlet fever at 5 years old, and that created an inflammatory cascade that set off an autoimmune condition. So it was a form of psoriasis called guttate psoriasis. I'm not sure how many of the listeners are familiar. There's probably a few people out there that are like, finally, somebody who has what I have and can speak to that, because it's not the most common thing. That was the very early 80s, and no one was talking about autoimmune disease, certainly not at all in the mainstream. I was going to so many different specialists, dermatologists, other doctors trying to figure out what it was that was going on with me, head to toe, full blown, insane rash that was cracking open, bleeding, extremely sore. For a child, that has major consequences to social development and just general happiness, comfort, et cetera. So of course, my parents were determined to try to find answers. But the answers just were not there. I mean, I didn't get a proper diagnosis until I was in my early 30s. And it really didn't happen because of any clinician. It happened just due to, stubborn will to try to find it on my own. And when I, approached my dermatologist and the team that was overseeing my case at the time, the light bulb went on and they're like, oh, yeah, that's it. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, which I thought was crazy. And I think that does happen a lot with autoimmune disease in general, but, it's not for the fault of the conventional medicine system. It's just that there's just not enough time with patients to really understand all of the things that are going on and all the triggers and whatnot. So nutrition was definitely never a topic of conversation, certainly within the first few decades of my life. And then, throughout the following years after that first diagnosis, I started to develop very painful joints in my ankles, fingers, hips, and hands. And I developed psoriatic arthritis. So again, another, common, they come oftentimes together, psoriatic arthritis and a psoriasis diagnosis. They kind of play off of each other often. And another inflammatory disease, of course. And then that added another layer to my life that I was not willing to accept. So I started to have chronic pain. And again, I was very, very young, so that just didn't seem right to me. And that was really what propelled me down the path for, continued understanding of inflammation, immunology, and, how lifestyle and diet really factors into that. And really, it does simply boil down almost entirely to those two things. There are other things, of course, to consider, environmental toxins and whatnot, but I really think diet and lifestyle are truly the center point for specifically autoimmune disease. And I think we can do a lot to really remedy and maybe not reverse, but at least put into remission a lot of different autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, we see that. I mean, I've been seeing that now for several years now, and I'm not alone in this. And so there does seem to be something there. And obviously, I'm personally trying to make some studies happen. I think there's just a wealth of potential benefit that we have for people there, but there's such a, obviously when you got your nutrition certification or degree, I'm sure you didn't learn that eating a meat-based diet is going to improve autoimmune disease. And so how did you sort of figure that out? And then if you're out in public doing this, are you getting any kind of pushback from nutritional, licensing folks or people within your field?
Yeah. So basically what happened with me and sort of the uncovering of an animal-centric diet being sort of the best way through this started when I adopted an autoimmune paleo diet. This is going back now almost 5 years ago. That is exactly where I went after being vegan for very, very, very long. And the reason I chose that diet was multifaceted, but I was, incredibly anemic. I was B12 deficient despite supplementation, anemic despite supplementation, exhausted all of the time, depressed. I had a young child, just didn't feel like, like the right, didn't feel normal to be in that position, like a young mother and feeling so crappy all of the time. And yet I was vegan. So I thought, hey, I'm doing everything right. But I kept coming up against these walls, these sort of energetic walls, but physically I wasn't performing well. I was, very much an athlete at the time. So there was just, everything wasn't working. And I was having more autoimmune flares than I had ever had prior to in my life, like constant back-to-back flares. And I sat down with myself one day and I said, I've been craving animal products for years now, and maybe it's time that I listen to those cravings and sort of explore that world a little bit. And with some sort of, minor, research online, 5 years ago is very different from now, even that's such a short period of time. I did stumble across some autoimmune paleo protocols, and I thought, this is interesting. I like this approach. They talked a lot about, like the ethical and better choice meats. And so that sort of struck a chord with me. And I thought, okay, they're really organ meat centric as well. And so I thought, I'm going to approach this like a protocol. I'm not going to eat meat just because it's meat. I'm going to go for like the gritty stuff. I'm going to go for the organs. That's where all the nutrients lie. I'm reading that this is the most important part. So I'll only eat those because then I won't enjoy it and it'll be like medicine. That's sort of like the mentality I had around it. And I remember the very first time I was eating liver, I was like a total savage. I was standing over my kitchen sink eating raw liver to a point where I was just like, it was insatiable. And I just, in that moment, I was like, this has got to be something. There's something to this. I mean, like I didn't use a fork. I didn't care. It was quite shocking for me. But that was really like the first moment forward. And then oddly, this is a good story for you, Shawn. I was a couple of years down the road from there. And I think you had done a podcast interview with Dr. Anthony Gustin from Perfect Keto. And so this is probably back to like, I don't even know, 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. And a friend of mine sent me the link to the podcast. You know, he was like, Cait, you got to check this guy out. He only eats meat. And I was like, well, that's incredibly irresponsible. And, but I listened, and my mind was blown apart. I was like, could this be like, I have to understand this more. So I went down the rabbit hole. I started to look at your story and other people's story that were in the carnivore space. And that led me to my first 45-day strict carnivore intervention with myself. And now, I mean, I didn't stick to a strict carnivore diet. I don't feel that I need to. I'm animal centric. 90% of my calories, I would say, come from that. But I am able to incorporate fermented foods and some specific vegetables and fruits seasonally. But I have absolutely used that protocol and intervention with many, 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 many clients since then, and have had just breathtaking results. So thank you, because actually it was all you that led me to the carnivore community.
Well, I mean, certainly I'm, it's good to see that, and good to see more people out there doing that. And, like I said, I did take a little bit of a risk by coming out publicly, because it's, it certainly wasn't accepted in the mainstream then, and it's still not, but I mean, we're making inroads for sure, particularly among like the low carb community. I know when you talk about the AIP protocol, I mean, Rob Wolf basically came up with that, and Rob basically told me, hey, I think carnivore works better than AIP for autoimmune diseases. So I thought that was a pretty big revelation there. But do you get clients that specifically seek you out to do a meat-based or an animal-based nutrition program, or do you just get the random person comes up and you drop it on them and they look at you like you got a third eyeball? How has that been working out for you?
It's a little bit of both. I would say typically the people that go on to a full carnivore protocol are seeking me out for that care. So, I'm on a number of different lists, like on Paul Saladino's, meat centric practitioner list. There's a couple of other forums that people find me through in this community. And so oftentimes those people will come to me, book in, and say, listen, I've read some research, or maybe not, there's not that much research, I guess, around it, hard research yet, but, I've read other people's accounts, anecdotal evidence, et cetera, that this might be a way forward for me. And can you support me through this? And in that case, of course, that's where we go. If it's, Jane Doe off the street who is eating a standard American diet, and I do think that that's the best way forward, that's where I might take an AIP approach first, just to lubricate everything a little bit more in that direction. But now and again, I do have clients that book in that surprise me, that are totally unfamiliar with even a ketogenic diet, and then with a little bit of coercion, they are quite eager and cooperative and wanting to sort of jump on the bandwagon and give it a try. So it's a real mixed bag. Earlier, you asked about, pushback in the industry from other nutritionists or from licensing bodies and maybe other doctors, et cetera. And, for sure, I do get pushback from time to time. I would say I'm getting less and less, which is really nice to see. But the pushback comes mostly from there's the regular people versus the clinicians, I find. And sometimes, I'll work in tandem with a primary care practitioner, and they might be a little bit nervous about, some recommendations that I'm making, but the proof is in the pudding always. And we see such incredible results and such quick, rapid transitioning of symptoms to a remission state that even those clinicians are pretty quick to sort of at least get comfortable with the idea that it might be working.
Yeah, and I think the proof is in the blood pudding, perhaps, if you want to do that. So when you back when you chose a vegan path, was that motivation to go vegan? Was that purely out of health concerns to try to improve these autoimmune conditions, or was it, kind of the ethical dilemma, or was it all the above? Or what made you adopt veganism? How long did you do it for? And did you see any benefit, and how long, if so, how long did it last? And what was the overall course? I know you said at the end you were having a lot of flares, but how did it go, and how long did you do it for?
Yeah. So Initially, I would fully acknowledge the fact that I adopted a vegan diet based on what was cool at the time. I'm not going to pretend that there was any other reason. And I think a lot of people do fall into that diet for the same reason. You know, it's kind of trendy. It wasn't even really all that popular at the time, way more than 10, 15 years ago now. But it felt rebellious. It felt like, you know, going against the grain, going against the status quo. Ironically, going against the grain meant eating all the grains at the time. So I think it was really based on that first and foremost. And then secondly, for me, it was environmental. So I was, you know, under the illusion that, you know, giving up all animal products was going to be the best possible thing for the environment, which I learned over years, you know, even through my vegan years, I started to realize, like, I don't know if that's quite right. But, you know, that kind of was the thing that had me in its grasp the longest. I would say adopting a vegan diet for health benefits was probably the last reason on the list for me. It never felt intuitive. It didn't feel like it was the healthiest diet, even from the beginning. Although it was obviously an improvement from, you know, kind of the standard American diet that I grew up on. It just didn't feel, like I said, intuitively didn't feel right. For many people, they maybe don't have access to that kind of sensation or feeling. But for me, it was just didn't sit well. So, I guess that was the reason. And then as the years went on, my health degraded. So the first sort of 2 years of the vegan diet, I felt quite good. I, you know, had great energy. I was happy. I was able to do everything that I was used to doing. You know, I had said I was a new mom. I was breastfeeding, like all of the things, you know, living a life that seemed totally normal. My blood work would always come back, you know, sort of average, normal, whatever. But then as time went on, so the further I got into it, you know, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, you know, iron stores kept dropping. I developed a B12 deficiency. I was experiencing more inflammation, more pain, fatigue, lack of will to do just about anything, you know, starting to feel quite anxious, depressed, like all of these symptoms just kind of started to snowball and snowball and snowball. And, you know, I was no fool. I definitely was starting to understand that there was a connection and that something was missing. But, you know, you get really integrated into that, you know, it's almost like a religion. It's you identify with it and you don't know how to detach. And I think that's a really hard place for a lot of people. I think people that are vegan, that know it's maybe not the best choice for them, they get stuck in it because they're afraid to admit that they were maybe wrong, or that there is a potentially a better way, or, you know, maybe their friends and family are vegan and they don't want to disappoint them or, you know, rock the boat in that way. So I think there's a big emotional identity piece there that people get really hung up on.
Yeah, as a nutritionist, I mean, one would assume you have at least some ability to design a diet that would be complete, even a vegan diet. And, you know, because a lot of people will say, well, the often heard refrain is they weren't doing it right. They were just eating junk food. I assume that wasn't the case with you. I assume you were designing a nutritionally complete diet that accounted for all the different, you know, sort of a lack of nutrients in a vegan diet and supplementing appropriately. That was true, correct?
Absolutely. So I was on a totally whole food based vegan diet. I didn't eat vegan chicken nuggets or vegan pre-made burgers. Like if I was going to do a veggie burger, I made it from scratch. You know, I was, you know, food combining, you know, rice and beans, trying to make sure all of my amino acid ratios were adequate, you know, lots of different kinds of protein powders. That was sort of the only really dietary supplementation that I did. You know, I'd mentioned earlier on, I was supplementing iron, plant-based iron, and B12, probably not methylating things properly. So that was likely the issue at the time. So I was doing everything right, you know, like as to the best of my ability, to the best of the knowledge that I had. I would say really the ideal vegan diet. And the runway on that, there is a runway on that, and there is an end to the runway on that for everyone, I truly believe.
Yeah. And, today, obviously you're going to animal centric focus, but if you get clients that say, hey, I want to do a vegan diet, or do you still even offer that as an option? Or do you get someone that's vegan, you say, hey, look, this is maybe not the best option for you. How do you navigate that particular situation?
Yeah, so I won't work with someone who is only interested in staying vegan. I absolutely work with many vegans who want to transition out of veganism. I will work with vegetarians so long as they're willing to consume dairy and eggs. That's where that ends though for me, because I just don't feel I can really guide or help someone with integrity in that way. So yeah, lots of people do still try to book in and ask to maintain a vegan diet. And at that point, I always give them an option. I say, I'm not going to bill you until, right, you've got 15 minutes sort of to like make this choice. If you want to maintain a vegan diet, I'm not the, clinician for you, but if you're interested in at least trying to, massage that a little bit and at least introduce some fish or some dairy or some eggs, then I'm happy to work with you. And usually I find people are quite willing to move the dial a little bit when there's a bit of a recommendation in that direction. And then it's just a slippery slope back to eating meat. And that makes me very happy.
Like you said, when you did it, it was because it was cool. And I think a lot of people, particularly younger, particularly female, seem to be, I would say often even, the desire to do well, maybe even an emotional based reason that we're going to, save the world, save the animals, so on and so forth. But realistically, when you look at what actually is accomplishing that, and I've always said, look, you can eat meat in a way that is extremely ethical and actually probably has more of a more positive impact on the environment if you choose to do so. If you're a vegan and you can afford to do that, because this is only a phenomenon in wealthy Western countries. You don't have, starving peasants in Africa and Southeast Asia, opting on a vegan diet voluntarily. It's because they have no other choice. But I mean, when you can make that choice if you want to do some activism, I'd say, why don't you put that energy into, rather than just saying all meat is bad, is saying this is what we should do. And if you don't like the factory farming, you can sort of push against that, but instead do this rather than the plant-based thing. Do you think there's any hope for some younger people wanting to do that? I mean, I think there's obviously, in my view, there is a lot of industry, corporate incentive to push the plant-based narrative, just because it's so much more profitable to put those products out there. But do you think there's hope for the younger generations to maybe adopt that sort of mantle?
Well, I have to have hope, because otherwise it gets pretty grim. But I do think you're right. I think there is a lot of motivation and incentive to continue or try to continue producing these plant-based products, because like that it's a product. So it's, there's way more room for profit margin, et cetera. And they're cheap to make, more or less, often subsidized, et cetera, as well. So I do think that that's going to be an uphill battle for sure. I feel like I see more and more people wrapping their minds around the idea of regenerative agriculture and more sustainable farming practices. And, whether that happens to be sort of within my tunnel vision and my, view of the world, maybe outside of that, it's not growing in the way that I think it is. But we are seeing more, documentaries like, Diana, like Sustainable Dish, her in
Sacred Cow.
Yeah, Sacred Cow. Thank you. I was losing my train of thought there. Sacred Cow, and then Brian Sanders is doing Food Lies, and there's been others, and I think those are going to be really important for us to use to sort of spread the word and help people kind of come back to reality and understand that there are better ways of farming meat. I also think that as much as I don't personally support conventional farming practices, I do think that even conventional meat is still better than laboratory meats or even plant-based proteins. It's a very controversial thing to say, and I understand that it is triggering emotionally for a lot of people. I wish that weren't the case, but I do still think from purely a nutritional standpoint that that's still going to be way better for someone to consume a conventionally grain-fed cut of steak than having, like a Impossible Burger, for example. Yeah.
I think that's a fair statement, and I've echoed that sentiment as well. I mean, I think there's I think there's an ideal, and then I think there's reality, and I think we have to sort of play where we are right now, and we can look toward the future. But yeah, I think the like I talked about at the beginning with the metabolomics and the nutriomics showing 50,000 different compounds, and 10% of them are contained in these faux meat sort of things. So you're missing out on a lot. So we've seen recently, tradition, it's like, well, B12, you got to supplement that. Then people are talking about, well, some of the omega-3 or omega-6 fats, some of the, some of these other iron and some of these other things that are known, but you can make them. But there's a lot of things we don't know. Like we're seeing choline just kind of recently came into view in the last year or two, about particularly with children and brain development. So choline is one. And then we're seeing, perhaps it's creatine, perhaps carnitine, all have these roles that are conditionally essential rather than, not necessarily purely essential, but there's conditions where you need them. And we see, there was a nice paper 2018 looking at major depressive disorder, and they found that people with major depressive disorder had a really significant association with low levels of carnitine. And so carnitine obviously found in animal products, not really found in plant-based products. And people that are on plant-based diets tend to have low carnitine levels, regardless, even though it is something we can endogenously make. We just don't make that much of it, or enough of it in some cases. Let's talk about children a little bit, because you have kids. Do you think, so famously, I always hear pushback from the vegan advocates about I think it's the American Academy of Nutritionists and Dietitians, and the Canadian version of the same position paper saying plant-based diet, perfectly acceptable, all ages and stages, from infants on up. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, at this point, you can probably guess what my thoughts are. I think that it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, because there's so many people that have been raising their children plant-based who are quite, again, like they get triggered by this conversation. And I have to say, I raised my son the first couple of years of his life on a plant-based diet, because that's when I was still vegan. He wasn't vegan. He was breastfed, so he was getting plenty of nutrients that way. And he did consume eggs and some fish at some points. And so, I carry a lot of resentment for how I chose to do that in the early stages. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like there was any long-term effects there or anything to worry about, because he was breastfed. And so I would say, if someone is raising their child or infant, baby, toddler on a plant-based diet, at least if they're breastfeeding, they're still getting lots of saturated fat and cholesterol and all of those good things and all of the fat soluble vitamins through breast milk. Where it really starts to worry me is when you have, a mother who's been vegan for a long time and her stores are depleted. I mean, we know that the average woman is going into a pregnancy, or 70% of women are going into a pregnancy deficient already, nutrient deficient. So then if you layer that with a vegan diet, and you maybe have like really low iron stores and other stores, and then you're going to breastfeed, which is depleting you even further, like you're just setting up a chain reaction of not so great things, like for mom, for baby, both short-term and long-term. So it is majorly concerning for me. And I do think that there are a lot of plant-based advocates out there that are recommending plant-based diets for children. I think it is so irresponsible. I don't think we have nearly enough case studies to know whether plant-based diets actually are beneficial or even survivable long-term. I see plenty of adults who've only been vegan for a number of years who are in real rough shape. So I can't even imagine starting a life that way and, developing like neurologically, especially optically, hormonally, working on the back foot like that. It just doesn't seem worth it to me. So I think making decisions like that for your children is irresponsible right now, given that we don't have a lot of history raising children on a vegan diet.
Yeah, and I think it's good for you to say that, because I think a discussion needs to be had, even though if it is uncomfortable. And I see a lot of the advocates, and they'll often frame it around heart disease, and you're talking about a 3-year-old, and it's like, there's not a lot of 3-year-olds having heart attacks. I mean, it's not the issue. So at least get them through their primary developmental times where that brain is developing, up until gosh, at least age 6 or something like that. And ideally your brain's still growing till age 25, if truth be told there. So, I mean, it's, the justification for doing that in kids is it's just mind blowing to me to think that, we're going to prevent, like I said, a 3-year-old from having a heart attack or something along those lines, which is clearly not really a realistic concern. What do you, so do you deal with children much? Do you have people coming to you for children? How do you start their diet? I mean, how would a breastfeeding mom transition? And I know this is, if you're familiar with, like, say Tim Noakes, who, I don't know if you know Tim Noakes' story. And
I don't think I know his story.
So, and what we're going to have to, Professor Tim Noakes, he's one of the world's most leading scientists, sports medicine scientists. He's a, MD, medical doctor, went into research, sports science, running, wrote The Lore of Running, wrote all kinds, just hugely respected throughout the world. And he, somewhere in his journey, he developed type 2 diabetes. His father died from that. And he made the decision that, hey, I need to go low carb. And he went back and looked at the actual recommendations he made, as a researcher, and said, I was wrong. I made mistakes and I'm retracting this stuff. And then he was on Twitter and somebody had asked him about breastfeeding babies and what to feed them on. He said something like, babies do fine on meat-based food or something. It was basically that suggestion. And that literally, the South African Dietetics Association tried to get his medical license removed.
Wow.
He had to go through 4 years of legal battle and presented like a 10-day testimony showing this is all the evidence that supports this stuff. So having that, and again, I don't think that's going to go on here, but I don't think anyone here is interested in that. But how do kids transition? I'm happy to say they grind up some meat, some eggs, stuff like that, maybe some pate, something soft they're not going to choke on, get them going. But how would you recommend a mom who's breastfeeding, like, what am I going to feed my kids? Like, do I need to give them the fruit chews and the rice cereal, or how do I start?
That's a great question. Actually, pediatrics are one of my favorite places to do this work, because I love the idea of setting people up really well right from the start. So preventative medicine is the best medicine. So if we can get people's diets dialed in from day one, then you're already on the front foot then. So oftentimes I will recommend, of course, like breastfeeding if possible is always going to be the best bet. With a mom whose diet is also animal centric. It doesn't have to be carnivore, but it does need to be rich with lots of bioavailable nutrients that do tend to come from animal products. And then, transitioning from breast milk to whole foods, and animal foods are really the best first foods. So I say absolutely no grains within the first year. That is the way that I practice. I majorly encourage that. If people want to introduce grains after that, then that's up to them. But I say no grains for sure within that first year. First foods would be things like wild caught salmon, beef liver, chicken liver, butter. If there's allergies that run in the family, like known dairy allergies, known egg allergies, then we restrict those from being some of the first foods. But if it's a family that doesn't have a history of allergies, then I think it's safe to incorporate those foods. Same thing with bone marrow, meat on the bone. If it's like a baby-led weaning situation, then they can gnaw on a steak bone or a chicken bone, so long as there's no small bones that are there that are possible choking hazards. So of course you have to use common sense in these situations, but also things like cod liver oil, egg yolks if they're tolerated, bone broth, gelatin, Jello, made with real gelatin, not with artificial coloring and sugars and things like that. Though on that note, I absolutely do not tolerate food coloring as far as any of my clients are concerned. I recommend that that's never introduced ever. We know that crosses the blood-brain barrier. So, lots of food coloring comes right into play with young children, and there's no room for it in the human diet, if you ask me. So sugar, grains, vegetable oils, artificial flavorings and colors, all of those things just don't exist. Most specifically that first year, but for as long as possible, ideally. And always animal products first, and then, non-starchy vegetables, root vegetables, and seasonal fruit, honey, maple syrup, if people are interested in incorporating more plant products or more plant foods into their children's lives.
In Canada, I think maybe it was last year, perhaps the year before, they came out with a new recommendations, the national guidelines, and they're very, 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 very plant centric. And in fact, in Nunavut, they've got a food igloo that, I mean, is just replete with grains and fruits and vegetables, things that obviously that population, this First Nations population of Inuit up there, could have never, ever been exposed to. What are your thoughts on the Canadian food guidelines and the recommendations that are going on there? And why do you think the recommendations are what they are?
Well, I'll say they're better than they were the last time they were done, barely, and only for some reason. So I definitely still don't think that they're perfect, far from it. But at least this round, there wasn't as much subsidy occurring from food corporations. I believe, if I'm not mistaken anyway, that was unsponsored. So again, like, that only goes so far. Like, everybody's, affiliated with something these days. So I'm sure there was still many political things that came into play there. But I did like the approach a little bit better. I could work with it. I could at least massage that a little bit better than the last one. As far as the food guidelines for Indigenous communities, that is diabolical to me. Those cultures never ever through their evolutionary history grew up or lived a life eating plenty of grains, especially. And so I don't think that's really ideal for any human, but especially someone who only up until very recently has ever even been exposed to them. One of the big topics of conversation, most surely in 2020 has been, all of these social justice topics about, anti-racism work and all of these things. And it's like, if you really want to have that conversation, then we need to talk about how we support these Indigenous communities with diets and diet guidelines that truly serve them culturally, so that they're culturally appropriate. And if we're not willing to get real about that, then I don't really understand how we're having that conversation at all. I just think it's criminal. I think that they should have every right to hunt and fish the way that they have, like I said, evolutionarily. And that's how their genetic makeup is going to be best served. And that's really the way forward for these communities. Otherwise, they are just going to crumble, because we already see massive increases in diabetes and heart disease in those communities.
Yeah, something tells me there's not a great deal of concern of whether they crumble or not, to be honest.
No, you're absolutely
cynic
right.
in me that says that. And, I saw, I think it was a year ago, there was as you probably know, they still allow whale hunting along those populations. And there was a whale hunt, I think, last year, and the oldest participant was 97 years old, still out on the boat hunting whale, which shows, I mean, to me, that's pretty impressive to have some of that, because you see these. Well, I don't really see that many 97-year-olds that even have any of their faculties. In fact, with rare exception, when I was working as an orthopedic surgeon, everybody I met that was that age was on a stretcher with a broken hip and demanded wearing a diaper. And so, I just don't find that we have this sort of. Well, I mean, the sad thing is we see that for the first time in our history in the last few years, life expectancy is actually going down rather than up. And I think it's because of the environment and food being a huge part of that. And this is the thing. One of the things I push back against, unfortunately, with nutrition is I don't think we have the data set, or it's even possible to get the data set that knows what produces longevity definitively. And so when we say, people are concerned about you dying in 30 or 40 years of heart disease, I'm saying I don't think we have the ability to do that. And so I tell people, let's meet you where you are and figure out where you are today. And because there is no dearth of people that have plenty of disease and disability and obesity and all this stuff. I mean, it's endemic. If there's a true global pandemic or endemic problem, it's that. Absolutely. More than anything. And we don't, I don't know why do you, I mean, I felt, the medical pharmaceutical industry is humongous in the United States and probably in Canada. It's a huge part of our GDP. And yet we pay so little attention to prevention and nutrition. I mean, we talk about it, almost we give a little bit of lip service, and then we just kind of, you go to a lecture and, they'll spend 30 seconds talking about diet and lifestyle, and the next 59 and a half minutes will be, these are the drug options and how you do that. So do you find it frustrating that so little attention is given towards, prevention?
I find it frustrating and heartbreaking. There are just so many people in my practice or even in my personal life that are victims of the lack of that conversation, because I think generally speaking, people want to do better. They want to listen. They listen. People listen. We know they listen generally to nutrition guidelines. If equipped with better information, if equipped with a little bit more time and guidance and a little bit more handholding, maybe, I think the whole world would be in a way better place. And I mean, if we want to talk about the current situation, the current pandemic you sort of mentioned, like, after almost a year of this, how is it not more mainstream right now that we're not talking about ways to become metabolically healthy? Like, I'm still shocked every single day when I wake up and that still isn't a conversation happening in the mainstream media. It's so bizarre to me. And I don't really understand why, because I meet plenty of doctors of all varying kinds, plenty of clinicians that have the same school of thought as you and I. Obviously, there are plenty more that don't, but I think that there's a growing body of clinicians that do understand the importance of diet and lifestyle, and its again, like its effects on, for sure, preventative health. But I don't know why we can't seem to push it over the line. Like, it just doesn't ever seem to become a big enough topic of conversation that it really makes a difference. And I don't know if that's lack of time, if it's lack of funding, or if it's something more diabolical that's happening to sort of, maintain the status quo and keep making money and all of that. I don't think I know enough about the system, and maybe I don't even want to go deep down that rabbit hole out of fear. But it is very unfortunate and very sad. And so I am extremely happy any old time I can get even a few people out of that sick care system by at least meeting them where they are, as you said, and showing them a better way forward. And sometimes we catch them early enough and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, and I'll just to keep it on this topic, not to get too controversial, but we will see and have seen, politicians, celebrities, influencers saying, hey, everybody put your mask on. And then it's going to be, hey, everybody get your vaccine. Why don't we see these same folks out there saying, hey, let's go outside for a walk in the sunshine for 20 minutes. Hey, let's make a healthier option, a dinner, choice at the meal table. And it doesn't necessarily, obviously, doesn't have to be a carnivore diet. But I mean, hey, let's just throw away the sodas and, the stuff that I think everybody would agree is garbage. But we don't see that. And I think the reason are unfortunately financial. I think, like I said, a lot of the media is supported by companies that have a lot of profit interest in, continue eating their junk food and continue taking the pharmaceutical, taking the vaccines. And I'm not going to say that all those are bad, but I think we don't have the same level of interest from these supposed people that do have influence over our lives, whether they be politicians, celebrities, and so on and so forth. And so to me, that's an absolute shame. And hopefully there'll be some that'll come up there and stand up and at least say that. Even if you say you're not against those other things, at least you should have that positive message. I mean, I think we can all agree that exercise and varying levels of intensity, whether it's just getting out and walking to, doing crazy stuff like I do, is going to be of benefit for most people. And like I said, I remember when Tonga, and this is many years ago, Tonga is a nation of Pacific Island, huge obesity rates, huge diabetes rates. And their king, they still had, I don't know if they still have a king then, but they had a king back then. And he went on a big diet and it was a national thing. Like, the king's going on a diet, we're all going on a diet. Now, I don't think it ever eventually turned into anything because they're still being told to eat the wrong stuff on their diet. But if you get let's say we have like I remember when Jack LaLanne was, I don't know if you know Jack LaLanne. He died recently, a few years ago, lived to 96. He was on the national TV. Hey, everybody. We don't seem to have that anymore. I mean, I think that's gone away. I mean, I think Schwarzenegger kind of did that a little bit years ago, but we don't have a big sort of national attention towards prevention.
We have the opposite now, like people like Lady Gaga releasing these Chrome Oreo cookie cross collaborations that are just like chemical shitstorms, excuse my language. Like, they're just horrific. That's what we have instead. We have these influencers, these massive voices that have so much power. They have so much power to make change, but it's all about the paycheck. You're not going to get a great paycheck from Farmer Joe. for promoting steak.
Yeah, well, and I can attest to that. I've gotten a few steaks out of it, but I'm not getting rich off telling people to eat meat. That's for sure. I mean, like I said, and hopefully, I think, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm getting rich in the sense that I am fulfilled.
I love that.
I think that's even more important, that you get to see people's lives turn around, and that's ultimately when, at the end of the day, we're not like the Egyptian pharaohs where we get buried with all our wealth. I mean, you're gonna be dead, and everything's gonna be remembered by is who you've hopefully made a difference for and helped. So that is fun. So hopefully you're experiencing the same of that. I think, like I said, I obviously have had my detractors, and sometimes I bring it upon myself because I kind of have I don't really care, and I push back pretty hard. And
we need that a little bit.
Sometimes in salty language sometimes, but at the same time, I'd say 90% of what I've gotten has been very positive, which is really good. And I hope you're experiencing the same thing. I assume
yes.
you are. Yeah.
Yes, I am. There's always going to be the sour folks out there, and they are the metabolically deficient individuals in the world who are super crusty and angry. And so usually I just remind myself of that whenever I come up against one. But for the most part, people are lovely and making giant changes in people's well-being and in their lives, literally saving people's lives just with information. Like, I'm not a wizard. I'm not giving you some secret code. I'm just providing you with an option, with information and support, and then you make the decision to change your life. So really, like, it's all about the individual and about what they're willing to put into it. And when those people take good information and implement it, everything changes real fast. And to me, that, like you said, that's worth more than any massive giant paycheck that someone would ever write me for releasing pink Oreos into the world.
Yeah, well, let me ask you, I'm sure because people want to know, I know you're not on a fully carnivorous diet. I'm totally fine with that. Like I said, I tell people I don't care what you eat as long as it makes you healthy. And I think meat is a key part of that. Mm-hmm. Some people just need to be pretty strict. And I generally pretty much am, although I'm eating eggs and some other things now. But what is your day-to-day diet look like, just personally, and your family's diet, just for sake of rounding that out?
Yep. So it is definitely meat centric. And it has been full carnivore for me at times based on needs. So I think that's, like you said, a lot of people need to be fully carnivore and very strict all of the time, or even sometimes, maybe even just as a reset now and again. For me, I find things work really, really well when I am consuming most of my calories from animal products. So that might be like ruminant animals like beef, bison, lamb. Fish is a big part of our diet, a wild caught fish, sardines, cod liver, cod, mackerel, things like that. Same with shellfish, oysters, and things like that. So that's like a really big part of our diet. And then we do lots of fermented foods. So those work really well in our house. So, kimchi, sauerkraut, other things like that. So like fermented non-starchy vegetables. We do some raw dairy. It's illegal here in Canada. So I have to be a bit careful about that, which is crazy to me. It's a whole other can of worms. But we do tend to incorporate some now and again, lots of eggs. And then my son has a little bit more leeway. I mean, he's going to be 10. He's, more and more exposed to other people and their ways of life. And although he's equipped with lots of information and makes generally the best decisions, peer pressure does sway him occasionally. But I feel really good about how he goes out into the world. Like he will never choose something with food coloring, for example. Like to him, that's just like, that doesn't equate food, so he won't do it. So, providing our kids with that kind of information, the why behind it, like, no, you can't not have that. It's like, but why? Why would you choose not to want it? Those are the questions and the answers that we should be providing for our kids in that space. And then I am grain-free, sugar-free, nut and seed-free, with the exception of, if I happen to be eating in somebody else's space and there is some seeds in something, I'm not going to, have a temper tantrum or anything like that. But 99% of the time it's very, I would say, like carnivore adjacent, keto, primal, paleo, some mashup of all of those.
Well, Cait, thank you very much. This has been very, very, very informative, and I appreciate what you're doing. Can you let folks know where to get hold of you if they want to, sort of contract you for your services, and if you have a social media, can you let folks know about that?
Of course, yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. So it's at Cait Mizzi, at CaitMizzi. And then my website is caitmizzi.ca. There's an online booking feature. You can book in directly through the website. I have a blog. I'm also a member of the Carnivore Roundtable. You've actually interviewed a couple of other folks from that. So we do have that additional space for more long format, roundtable conversations about carnivore diet specifically. And then I just launched my own podcast about 2 months ago-ish. That's called the Nosh Podcast, and it is not carnivore centric, it's just health centric. So that's another place people can, learn more for free.
All right, Cait. Well, any last words you want to leave with us before we go? It's been right at an hour, and I'm getting hungry.
My last words would be go eat, enjoy your meal. Bon appetit.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to learn Spanish, so I think it's buen provecho or something like that.
I wouldn't be able to tell you on that one.
All right, guys. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Cait, have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much to keep doing what you're doing, and maybe we'll hook back up down the road and do this again sometime.
I would love that. Have a happy holidays. Take care.
All right, guys. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.